At 11:23 in the morning, under clear skies in eastern Ukraine, a Russian military convoy rolled forward with confidence, believing daylight itself was protection. 23 vehicles moved west to east along Highway M3 toward the Avdiivka sector, spaced tightly, engines pushing hard, stretching nearly 4 kilometers across exposed asphalt. Ammunition carriers, fuel trucks, infantry fighting vehicles, transport lorries, and command units were packed with supplies meant to shape the next week of fighting. From the Russian command perspective, this was a calculated risk, not a reckless one. The weather was perfect. Visibility was unlimited. Ukrainian artillery activity along the route had been quiet. Most importantly, the convoy was shielded by layered air defense, 2 Pantsir systems positioned at the front, and rear radars, rotating missiles, loaded cannons ready. What made this movement strategically critical was not the number of vehicles, but what they represented. Logistics in this sector had already been under strain, with Ukrainian strikes on fuel depots, rail hubs, and energy infrastructure forcing Russian units to rely on vulnerable road transport. Western analysts cited by Reuters and Defense News have repeatedly noted that Russian frontline units in eastern Ukraine are increasingly constrained not by manpower, but by resupply timing. If this convoy reached cover, Russian forces near Avdiivka would receive ammunition, fuel, and command reinforcement just as Ukrainian pressure was intensifying. If it failed, the ripple effects would last days, possibly weeks. What the convoy commander did not know was that Ukrainian intelligence had already been tracking the column for nearly 3 hours. Signals interception earlier that morning revealed the route, speed, destination, and critically, the exact air defense assets assigned to protect it. This was not guesswork. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, ground sensors, and intercepted radio traffic created a near real-time picture of the convoy's movement. According to Western military analysts speaking to the BBC, Ukraine's ability to fuse intelligence sources has quietly become one of its most decisive advantages, compensating for limited aircraft numbers and aging platforms. At the strategic level, this moment reflected a broader shift in the war. NATO planners observing the conflict have emphasized that daylight no longer guarantees safety even under air defense cover. The assumption that visibility deters attack has been eroded by Ukrainian willingness to strike aggressively when intelligence, timing, and opportunity align. This convoy had approximately 35 minutes before reaching more protected terrain. After that, Ukrainian strike options would shrink dramatically, and Russian units would gain a short-term operational edge. As the vehicles pushed forward, unaware of the invisible surveillance above and around them, the decision point was already closing. Ukrainian command now faced a stark choice: allow the convoy through and absorb the battlefield consequences, or commit scarce air assets to a high-risk daylight strike with enormous potential payoff and equally enormous danger. The clock was ticking, and somewhere behind the front line, one aircraft was being armed for a mission that could alter the balance in this sector before nightfall. While the convoy pressed eastward, Ukrainian intelligence operations were already deep into the execution phase, turning hours of quiet surveillance into a narrowing window for action. Long before the first Russian vehicle reached Highway M3, Ukrainian signals units had intercepted routine but revealing radio traffic that confirmed convoy timing, spacing, and escort assignments. According to Western officials cited by Reuters, these communications were not encrypted to NATO standards, a vulnerability that Ukrainian forces have increasingly exploited as Russian units rush logistics movements under pressure. What emerged was a complete operational picture. A high-value convoy exposed terrain, predictable movement, and air defenses that appeared formidable on paper but familiar in practice. The intelligence advantage was not accidental. Over the past year, Ukraine has expanded its integration of drone reconnaissance, satellite imagery shared by Western partners, and ground-based sensors positioned along likely Russian supply routes. Analysts at Defense News have pointed out that this intelligence fusion mirrors NATO doctrine, even if Ukraine lacks NATO's airpower scale. The result is precision timing rather than mass. For this convoy, Ukrainian planners knew exactly when it would be most vulnerable, far enough from cover to be committed, but close enough to force a rapid decision. As the convoy crossed kilometer marker, 47 Ukrainian command assessed the strategic stakes. Russian frontline units near Avdiivka were already facing ammunition rationing following repeated Ukrainian strikes on fuel depots and energy infrastructure deeper behind the lines. Al Jazeera reporting in recent weeks highlighted how Ukrainian attacks on refineries and power facilities have forced Russia to divert air defense systems away from the front, thinning protection for logistics corridors. This convoy was part of that improvised workaround, a ground-based lifeline moving through daylight to compensate for damaged rail and energy networks. The decision to strike was not taken lightly. On paper, committing a single aircraft against an escorted convoy in broad daylight violated conventional risk calculations. NATO air doctrine favors overwhelming suppression of enemy air defenses before any strike. Ukraine did not have that luxury. Instead, commanders relied on accumulated experience. Over 2 years of war, Ukrainian pilots had logged hundreds of encounters with Russian Pantsir and Tor systems, cataloging response times, radar behavior, and engagement patterns. Western air warfare specialists quoted by the BBC have described this learning process as combat-driven adaptation, where survival becomes a form of intelligence gathering. As the clock continued to run, Ukrainian ground controllers relayed final updates. The convoy remained exposed. Air defenses were active but unchanged. Weather conditions offered no concealment. Authorization was granted for immediate interception. The mission parameters were brutally simple: stop the convoy before it reached cover, or accept the downstream consequences on the battlefield. There would be no second wave. No backup aircraft, no margin for error. Behind the scenes, NATO observers tracking the conflict viewed this moment as another data point in a broader pattern. The war was no longer defined solely by territory gained or lost, but by logistics disrupted and tempo denied. A single successful strike could delay operations, drain resources, and force Russian commanders into reactive posture. As one Western analyst noted to the New York Times, modern warfare punishes predictability more than weakness. As Ukrainian command finalized the strike order, the intelligence picture was complete. The only remaining variable was whether one aircraft, one pilot, and a narrow window of time would be enough to turn information dominance into decisive action before the convoy disappeared into safety and the opportunity vanished. As Ukrainian command committed to the strike, the burden of execution shifted entirely to a single aircraft and a single pilot. The Su-25 assigned to the mission was already familiar to ground crews, its airframe marked by previous repairs, its systems tested under combat conditions dozens of times before. In Western air forces, such an aircraft might have been retired or relegated to secondary roles. In Ukraine's air war, it remained a frontline tool, valued not for sophistication, but for survivability and precision under pressure. The pilot climbing into the cockpit had flown nearly 90 combat missions, many of them against layered Russian air defenses that NATO planners would normally neutralize with waves of aircraft. The mission briefing was stark: 23 vehicles on open roadway, 2 active Pantsir systems, clear skies, no supporting aircraft, no electronic warfare escort, no margin for delay. If the convoy reached cover, Russian units near Avdiivka would stabilize their supply situation at a moment when Ukrainian ground forces were applying pressure. Western military analysts cited by Defense News have repeatedly emphasized that logistics windows like this are fleeting. Once closed opportunities rarely reappear in the same form. The aircraft was armed with laser-guided missiles and 80 unguided rockets, a loadout designed to balance precision and destructive spread. Takeoff occurred under routine radio silence, broken only by encrypted updates from ground controllers. As the Su-25 accelerated eastward, it descended rapidly, dropping to roughly 150 meters above ground level. At this altitude, terrain masking became the primary defense. Tree lines, shallow valleys, and minor elevation changes disrupted radar coverage, forcing Russian air defense operators to rely on intermittent returns. Flying this low at high speed left no room for error. According to NATO-trained pilots interviewed by the BBC, sustained low-level flight under combat conditions is among the most demanding profiles in modern air warfare. Throughout the approach, Ukrainian controllers fed real-time adjustments. The convoy's speed remained constant. The Pantsir systems were active and scanning their radars, rotating steadily. This confirmed what intelligence had already suggested: Russian crews expected potential threats, but did not anticipate an immediate daylight strike. That assumption, Western analysts argue, reflects a broader Russian tendency to equate visibility with deterrence, a belief increasingly disproven by Ukrainian operations. At approximately 8 kilometers from the convoy, the pilot initiated the attack sequence. The aircraft surged upward in a sharp climb, exposing itself instantly to enemy radar. In that moment, detection was inevitable. The pilot's survival now depended on timing measured in seconds. From radar acquisition to missile launch, Russian systems typically require less than 10 seconds, a window Ukrainian pilots have learned to exploit with precision. As the targeting system came alive, the convoy filled the display. Vehicles stretched across the highway like a moving supply depot. The two Pantsir systems were unmistakable, positioned exactly where intelligence had predicted. The targeting computer locked onto the first system. There was no hesitation. The first missile was launched, followed almost immediately by the second. From that point forward, events would unfold faster than any command center could influence. In NATO, assessments of the war moments like this highlight a critical reality. Modern air combat at the tactical level often comes down to individual decisions made under extreme compression of time. The Su-25 had committed. The convoy was about to discover that daylight and air defenses were not guarantees but variables, ones that could be overturned in seconds. The moment the missiles left the rails, the engagement became a race between physics and human reaction. Both Pantsir systems detected the launches almost immediately, their radars snapping from search to track mode in seconds. For Russian air defense crews, this was the scenario they trained for: a low-flying attacker suddenly appearing, launching weapons, then attempting to escape before interception. On paper, the Pantsir was designed precisely to defeat this kind of threat. In reality, timing, saturation, and learned Ukrainian countermeasures began to tilt the balance. As the first missile closed the distance, the forward Pantsir responded aggressively. Interceptor missiles launched upward, followed by bursts from its rapid-fire cannons, filling the air with a dense cloud of fragments meant to shred incoming weapons. At the same time, the Ukrainian pilot released countermeasures. Chaff flooded the radar picture with false returns, overwhelming tracking systems already working under stress. Western air defense specialists, quoted by Defense News, have noted that systems like Pantsir are effective but vulnerable when forced to discriminate between multiple targets in compressed timeframes. The first missile struck the forward Pantsir's radar assembly directly. The impact was decisive. The radar dish shattered, internal electronics were destroyed, and the system lost combat capability almost instantly. Less than a second later, the second missile reached the rear Pantsir. Its crew had only moments more warning. Missiles were fired in quick succession, cannons opened up, and tracer rounds arced skyward. But laser guidance corrected the missile's path through the chaos. It slammed into the vehicle's upper structure, detonating amid launch tubes and control systems. Smoke poured from the chassis as the crew abandoned the vehicle, the system effectively neutralized. Both air defense platforms were taken out in under 20 seconds. For the convoy, this was the point of no return. What had been a protected movement instantly became an exposed target zone. Russian radio traffic surged with urgent calls for support, but the nearest additional air defense units were too far away to intervene in time. NATO analysts observing similar engagements have pointed out that air defense coverage, when defeated locally, creates cascading vulnerability across entire formations. The Ukrainian pilot wasted no time. With the defensive shield removed, he climbed again, setting up for a rocket attack run. 80 unguided rockets remained on board, each capable of disabling or destroying vehicles within lethal radius. As the aircraft aligned along the highway, the convoy below began to fragment. Vehicles braked hard. Some attempted to disperse, others halted entirely, blocking those behind them. This sudden loss of cohesion amplified the strike's effectiveness, a phenomenon Western military studies consistently highlight. Logistics columns are most vulnerable when forced to react under fire. Salvo after salvo streaked downward. Fuel trucks erupted into towering fireballs. An ammunition carrier detonated with such force that shockwaves rippled across the surrounding countryside, later confirmed by Ukrainian drones surveying the wreckage. Infantry vehicles were flipped or torn open by near misses. Command vehicles lost communications as antennas melted or were blown away. In minutes, the highway transformed into a corridor of burning wreckage, smoke columns rising high enough to be seen for kilometers. From a strategic standpoint, NATO observers would later note that this phase of the attack illustrated a core lesson of the war. Once air defense fails, logistics formations collapse rapidly. The destruction was not only physical, but operational. Supplies meant to sustain combat power were gone, and with them Russia's short-term ability to press its advantage in the sector. As the pilot completed his final pass, alarms blared in the cockpit. Enemy radars were locking on again. The escape phase was about to begin, and it would be just as dangerous as the strike itself. The escape began under immediate and escalating threat. As the Ukrainian Su-25 pulled away from the burning highway, radar warning tones flooded the cockpit, signaling that multiple Russian systems had now acquired the aircraft. Within seconds, missile launches were detected from a Tor battery, positioned more than 20 kilometers away its elevated placement, giving it a partial line of sight, despite terrain masking. According to NATO-aligned analysts cited by Military Watch magazine, this phase of an attack is statistically the most lethal. Once weapons are released, aircraft must survive a layered response from systems that were previously out of engagement range. The first two missiles closed fast, traveling at hypersonic speed. The pilot reacted instantly, pushing the aircraft into a steep dive, dropping from nearly 2,000 meters to barely 100 meters above ground in seconds. The maneuver forced extreme G-loads, compressing the pilot into the seat as the Su-25 skimmed treetops and ridgelines. Terrain masking once again became the primary defense. Hills, forest lines, and shallow valleys disrupted radar locks, forcing Russian operators to reacquire repeatedly. Russian crews adapted. A second volley was launched, this time anticipating low-altitude evasion. Countermeasures filled the air behind the aircraft chaff to confuse radar seekers' flares, burning hotter than the engines, to distract infrared guidance, and electronic jamming, generating false targets. One missile veered sharply and detonated harmlessly after locking onto a flare. The second lost radar lock, but continued on inertial guidance, detonating less than 100 meters behind the aircraft. Shrapnel tore into the Su-25's tail section. Warning lights illuminated instantly. Hydraulic pressure dropped. Control response degraded. The aircraft shuddered violently, but remained airborne. Western pilots interviewed by the BBC have described such moments as managed chaos, where survival depends on instinct drilled through repetition rather than conscious thought. The pilot maintained maximum speed at ultra-low altitude, weaving through terrain where radar coverage was weakest. Behind him, Russian missiles detonated against empty air where the aircraft had been seconds earlier. After roughly 15 minutes, the Su-25 crossed back into Ukrainian-controlled airspace. Fuel levels were low but sufficient. Damage was confirmed but contained. Ground controllers cleared the aircraft to return to base. The strategic impact of survival was as significant as the strike itself. Had the aircraft been lost, Ukraine would have suffered not only material loss, but also a symbolic blow. Instead, the mission reinforced a pattern NATO analysts have increasingly emphasized. Ukrainian pilots are forcing Russian air defenses into costly reactive engagements that consume missiles faster than they can be replaced. Reuters reporting has highlighted concerns within Russia about interceptor stockpiles, particularly as air defense systems are stretched between protecting frontline units and shielding critical energy infrastructure deeper inside the country. As the damaged Su-25 approached its airfield, confirmation arrived from Ukrainian drones already orbiting the strike site. The convoy had been effectively neutralized. But the larger question now loomed: how long could Russia sustain operations when even daylight air defense and numerical advantage no longer guaranteed safe movement? The answer would not emerge immediately, but the consequences were already unfolding across the front. In the hours following the strike, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones remained overhead, documenting the aftermath in precise detail. Of the 23 vehicles that entered the highway that morning, 9 were completely destroyed, reduced to burned-out hulks that would never move again. 8 more were damaged or immobilized, their cargo scattered or consumed by fire. The remaining vehicles, though partially intact, were trapped behind craters, twisted wreckage, and ongoing fires. The highway itself was effectively severed. Fuel burned for hours, sending thick black smoke into the sky, while secondary ammunition explosions cratered the road surface, rendering recovery operations slow and dangerous. Russian recovery teams arrived cautiously aware that any prolonged activity risked follow-on Ukrainian artillery or drone strikes. They managed to retrieve only a handful of damaged vehicles before withdrawing. The convoy's mission had failed completely. Supplies intended to stabilize frontline units near Avdiivka never arrived. In the days that followed, Ukrainian intelligence observed reduced Russian artillery fire and limited maneuvering in the sector. Western analysts cited by Reuters noted that such disruptions rarely make headlines, but quietly shape battlefield momentum, forcing commanders to delay operations or accept higher risk elsewhere. At the operational level, NATO observers framed the strike as another illustration of Ukraine's evolving approach to air warfare. The Su-25 involved was a Soviet-era aircraft, subsonic non-stealth, and theoretically outmatched by modern air defenses. Yet it survived. Ground crews repaired the damage within 48 hours, returning the aircraft to service almost immediately. The pilot flew again shortly after, underscoring a grim reality of this conflict. Survivability is now driven less by platform superiority than by intelligence integration experience and calculated risk. Strategically, the implications extend beyond one convoy. Russia's reliance on exposed road logistics has grown as Ukrainian attacks on refineries, power stations, and rail hubs continue to strain energy and transport networks. NATO assessments emphasize that every successful interdiction compounds economic pressure, forcing Russia to divert air defenses away from cities and infrastructure to protect supply lines. This redistribution weakens overall coverage and creates new vulnerabilities. For the United States and its allies under President Donald Trump, the lesson is clear. Modern conflicts are being shaped by adaptability rather than sheer technological dominance. Ukraine's ability to combine Western intelligence support with aggressive execution continues to challenge traditional assumptions about air defense deterrence and battlefield transparency. The convoy believed daylight guaranteed safety. Instead, it became evidence that in this war, visibility no longer protects, it exposes. This operation unfolded as a textbook example of how modern warfare is increasingly decided away from the front line. A Russian convoy critical to sustaining operations near Avdiivka moved in daylight under layered air defense, assuming visibility, and technology would ensure protection. Ukrainian intelligence, however, tracked the movement for hours, exploiting predictable logistics and known air defense patterns. A single Su-25 strike neutralized the convoy's protection, destroyed or immobilized most of its vehicles, and delayed Russian operations at a critical moment. The broader implications reach beyond one battlefield. Continued Ukrainian strikes on logistics and energy infrastructure are forcing Russia to stretch air defenses thin, creating cascading economic and military strain. NATO analysts view these operations as evidence that adaptability, intelligence fusion, and timing now rival traditional air superiority. For the United States and the West, this conflict offers hard data on how future wars may unfold when even daylight and air defenses fail to guarantee security. Looking ahead, the question is whether Russia can adapt quickly enough to protect its supply networks, or whether these disruptions will continue to erode operational momentum. What do you think? Can logistics pressure alone reshape the course of this war? If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to the channel for deeper breakdowns of the battles shaping today's global security landscape.